The night beyond the wall was not simply cold. It was a living silence that pressed against Arya Stark's lungs until every breath rasped like a knife drawn along stone. Wind scoured the nameless pass behind her, lifting powdered snow in twisting scrolls that erased her footprints the instant she set them down. Somewhere behind that white curtain lay the hunting party from Castle Black, and the great shaggy shadow of Ghost prowling after Jon. Yet their torches had winked out one by one until the world dwindled to the meager glow of her own lantern. And then that, too, guttered in a gust. She had meant to circle a ridge and surprise Gendry with a snowball. She had meant to return in moments. Instead, she walked now beneath a sky so clear it seemed carved from ice, its scar-shine stars reflecting in every drifting crystal, countless pale eyes watching her from above. She told herself stories to keep the terror at bay, tales Syrio Farrell had once murmured in bravos while the seaside beneath the wooden planks of the water gardens. Arya recited the forms: cat on the wall, bull's charge, whirling snow. Moving her feet to the rhythm, blade held low, breath slow. The game of faces steadied her heart, for a while. But in the haunted silence beyond the wall, memory was no shield. Each remembered warmth only sharpened the teeth of the cold. And so, when the scraping whisper of something vast sliding over crusted snow reached her ears, she did not break into a panicked sprint. Instead, she sank to a crouch behind a saw-toothed lump of ice, pressed her glove to the pommel of needle and waited. Shapes emerged. Frail at first glance, gaunt silhouettes with arms that swung too loosely at their sides. Wights, a line of them, trudging in mechanical unison across a shallow basin. Their jerking limbs cracked the frost. Their dead eyes glimmered with stolen starlight. Arya's breath caught. There were dozens, perhaps 100 bows still slung across their rotting shoulders as if the impulse to hunt lingered. They did not hunt her. They marched toward a deeper darkness pooling between two humpback hills. And there, like a shard driven through the earth, stood a figure she had feared only in Jon's bleakest stories. Tall as Hodder, taller perhaps, armored in interlocking plates of crystal blue ice that drank the moon and spit it back as shifting fire. The Night King, a single long-bladed spear balanced unnaturally in his hollow grip. He made no gesture, spoke no curse, yet the dead obeyed. It was obedience woven into marrow by an ancient magic older than men's tongues. Arya knew she should flee, but the world seemed to constrict around that blue flame in his eyes, and her muscles refused their orders. She knelt in snow up to her thighs and could only watch as ghost-pale light spilled from him, revealing the marks of an ancient road buried beneath drifts, the bones of a civilization thawed only by death's presence. The whites parted, silent as birds changing flight, to reveal a litter of ice-slick branches bound together in the rough outline of a sledge. Something lay upon it. A child, perhaps, swaddled in furs gone stiff with rime. A living offering, or new dead to be claimed. Arya's stomach clenched. She had seen enough horrors to swear that never again would she stand idle. Yet now she was a rabbit beneath the gaze of a dire wolf, transfixed by inevitability. Then his head turned. No sudden twist, no flourish, merely the slow inevitability of a glacier altering its course. The Night King's stare found her behind her sheltering stone. Blue light lanced through deepening shadow, illuminating the hairs that drifted before her eyes. An ancient pulse beat behind that glare, older than Winterfell's foundations, older than the wall itself, older, perhaps, than hate. She felt it reach across the clearing and curl around her racing heart as though testing its rhythm. She thought of Bran falling from the tower, of Sansa spinning in the ballroom of her own fears, of the father lost upon Baelor's steps, and she stood. Snow sloughed from her cloak. Needle gleamed dull and useless, a sewing pin before a mountain. But still she held it point forward, feet angled as Syrio had taught her, breath a measured cadence between her teeth. The whites stilled. For a heartbeat the world held its breath. The Night King stepped forward. Ice cracked beneath his tread, leaving footprints that flashed white-blue then froze hard enough to ring like struck iron. He closed half the distance between them in 3 strides, each deliberate as a bell toll. When he halted, the silence slapped Arya across the face. Nothing lived here that dared draw breath in his shadow. The lantern she had dropped flickered once, then died. Only his eyes remained alight. "Not today," she whispered, though her lips barely moved. She felt the words shiver through her. In the same instant, the Night King raised his spear, not to strike, but vertical before him, both hands around its haft. It did not feel like mercy. It felt like judgment. Something unseen passed between them, an inspection, perhaps, of spirit rather than flesh, as though he counted the scars upon her soul. She had many. She wore them proud. The world tilted. A vision unfurled behind her eyes. The godswood at Winterfell drowning beneath drifts. The heart tree's red eyes weeping frozen tears. Nymeria's pack scattering through skeletal woods. Jon's sword blazing with ghost fire atop the wall, slaying enemies she could barely name. Each image sharpened until it bled. Then it was gone, and she staggered back into her own body. The Night King lowered his spear. At a silent command, the whites closed in an outward ring, leaving Arya alone in a small island of untouched snow. Their jaws hung slack, teeth rimed in frost, but they did not attack. They stood sentinel. The Night King beckoned. One unclasped hand turned outward in an unmistakable summons. 1,000 screams battled behind Arya's ribs, each urging her to run, to fight, to die clawing at the dark. But the novice in the House of Black and White knew the power of accepting a role. Sheathing needle, she stepped from her refuge into the circle of death. The cold drove serpent fangs through her boot soles. Yet with each step, fear slid from her shoulders like shed skin, replaced by a dreadful clarity. The Night King did not kill her because he had no need. A game was begun, and she had been chosen as a piece upon that frost-rimmed board. When she reached him, he extended 2 fingers and pressed them above her brow. In that touch, she felt heat vanish, marrow stiffen, time fracture. She saw golden leaves flayed from branches in a whirl of years. She saw the wall built, stone dragged by giants and men alike. She saw a weirwood heart cloven by obsidian, birthing blue fire. She tasted winter without end. And then, impossibly, she saw herself. Eyes filmed with ice, moving among white shadows beneath a perpetual moon. Arya screamed in silence. The world snapped back. She did not fall. The ground rose to meet her in slow, graceful tilt until snow cushioned her shoulders. Above, the Night King gazed upon her with neither triumph nor contempt, but something colder, curiosity frozen beyond empathy. He spoke in a tongue like cracking lakeshore ice. From the forest's edge, a pair of white walkers answered, their voices chiming glass pure, and the whites seized the wooden litter, shoving aside its burden with mechanical indifference. Arya was lifted in its place, bound not by rope or chain but by the absolute stillness of limbs refusing to obey. The litter scraped forward, pulled by the dead through drifts that hissed like fat on iron. Hours bled, or days. Time dissolved in endless white until Arya no longer measured it in heartbeats but in the distant thunder of cracking glaciers and the breath of something vast beneath the ice, stirring with each footfall of the Night King. She floated between waking visions. Sansa's laughter carried on spring wind, Hot Pie's crust-brown smile, Robb slipping a sword into his belt that last morning at Winterfell, ghost memories already half-frozen. Each thought cost her warmth. Each warmth abandoned cost her something of herself. But at the edge of hypothermic sleep, needles' weight against her ribs remained an anchor. Valyrian steel, forged in dragonfire. As long as she felt that sliver of heat, she remained Arya. Eventually the land rose and the air sharpened with ancient sorcery, a taste like powdered silver. A jagged curtain appeared, cliffs veined black where volcanic stone punched through the ice. At their base yawned a cavern mouth lit by pale foxfire. Columns of frozen mist rose like gate towers, carved by unhurried centuries. The procession entered. Darkness swallowed the stars. Only the Night King's gaze remained, guiding his legion by unwavering presence. Under that roof of glacier glass, the dead moved faster. Sound grew muffled, as though even echoes feared to disturb the sleep of what dwelled here. At the heart of the cavern lay a lake of ice so clear it mirrored the hidden sky beneath the world. Embedded within its glassy surface were shapes, Men, women, perhaps children, preserved in tableau, arms raised in mute defiance, mouths frozen mid-shriek. Arya's breath caught as she saw among them a ranger's black cloak, a rusted longsword, a child's wooden knight. Every person held within bore a single wound, a dagger of obsidian buried just above the heart. The children of the forest had made the first White Walker thus. Here, the Night King perfected the design, an army entombed in potential. The procession halted at the lake center. The Night King raised his spear. The lake answered with a bell-clear chime. Fissures spider-webbed outward, each line glowing cerulean. As they intersected the frozen corpses, the obsidian daggers pulsed, drinking the light. Flesh blanched, eyes ignited. One by one, the entombed awakened, pushing up through shattering ice into the world of their new master. Arya watched in horrified fascination. Birth and funeral intermingled in one cold sacrament. She understood then, this was not conquest for its own sake. It was a ritual, a gathering of every story into one silence. The Night King was rewriting death itself, inscribing runes of dominion deeper than any maester's ink. And she, Arya Stark, had been brought as witness, perhaps as instrument. Why her? Why not slay her and swell the ranks? Some purpose older than her lineage spiraled here, a design traced by long-dead hands. She would find it, and she would break it or be broken. She waited until the Night King's focus settled upon the emergent recruits, then flexed her fingers. Blood sluggishly resumed its course, staggering like a drunk from tavern to tavern. Sensation returned with burning pins. She slid a hand toward Needle. Leather creaked. A White's head snapped to her, eyes sapphire. His jaw worked, but no sound escaped. It stepped forward, spear poised. Arya froze. The Night King's head tilted. The White halted mid-stride, spear tip inches from her throat. A command passed in silence, and the creature retreated. Not yet, Arya breathed, voice ragged as torn parchment. The Night King approached. He knelt beside her, a glacier bending to observe an ember. One hand emerged from his armor. 5 fingers of translucent death. They lingered above her chest, over the fierce hammering heart that refused surrender. In the crystalline reflection of his nails, Arya saw her own eyes, gray, storm-bright, still defiant. She thought of her list. She thought of the names she recited each night to keep the dark at bay. She added one more, the Night King. His hand lowered, light as falling snow, until a single finger touched the leather above Needle's hilt. At once a howl raced through her nerves. Winter's fury meeting Dragonfire's ghost. Valyrian steel vibrated, warming despite the chill, and a hairline crack shot through the frozen lake. The Night King withdrew sharply. For the first time Arya sensed, if not fear, then caution. An opportunity bloomed. She seized it without thought. Needle leapt free, the motion as natural as breath, and the world slowed to the tempo of dancing lessons in the Red Keep. She thrust upward. The blade's point kissed the Night King's cuirass. Ice shrieked. Blue light spidered across the steel, and frost spread along the blade toward her glove. Yet the armor did not shatter. The spear came down like a falling moon. Arya twisted, blade scraping free to deflect, and the impact hurled her across the ice. She rolled, came to one knee. Pain lanced up her arm. Needle's edge steamed. Frost lace etched the fuller. Whites encircled her again, a storm tightening its eye. The Night King stood motionless, spear now leveled. Behind his gaze flickered an emotion she could not name. Recognition? Respect? Anger? He spoke a single word, a jarring clang that made her bones hum. The dead advanced. Arya dashed toward the fissure she had birthed. Ice cracked beneath her, a lightning bolt path through the lake. At the last instant, she plunged her blade into a jagged seam and leapt. The ice gave way, swallowing her in a flood of cruel black. Cold clamped around her chest, tore the breath from her lungs. Yet the darkness below felt strangely alive, swirling with faint green motes like drowned fireflies. Hands brushed her shoulders. Tiny, clawed, unmistakably not human. The children of the forest, or their ghosts, perhaps lingering still in the realm they had shaped. One slender hand cupped her cheek. In that touch she tasted sap and summer rain, the scent of pine on a distant warm wind. A voice, wordless, thrummed through her skull, offering a single choice: rise or be remade. She chose. The lake burst upward in a geyser of shattered ice and raw magic. Arya exploded from its heart, clinging to a chunk of crystal, hair haloed in frost. Needle blazed with ghost fire, cracks filled with molten silver. Steam coiled from the blade. She landed on quaking ice amid stunned wights that wavered as if uncertain of their own masters. The Night King's spear wavered. His eyes narrowed. "Vala Morgulis," Arya spat, though her lips were numb. But the words did not end as before. Another voice echoed them, layered behind hers, older, nearer to the first scream of chill that birthed winter. The lake glowed beneath her feet. Runes flickered under the ice, spirals and sigils like those Jon had found in caves. The children's mark. Arya understood nothing of their language, yet she felt the intention. A binding laid by those who created the Night King, a failsafe requiring living blood touched by deathfire. Her blood, her blade, and a story that must be witnessed to its end. The cavern trembled. Whites began to crumble, ice flowering from their eyes and mouths until they collapsed into shards. The newborn White Walkers clutched at their chests, obsidian daggers pulsing like dying hearts, and fell upon the glassy floor. The Night King alone remained, the blue of his gaze hardening into diamond fury. He strode forward, each step cracking reality. Spears of ice jutted from the lake, slicing paths between them like rising fangs. Arya darted, leaping from one shrinking island of safety to the next, blade humming in her hand. Her lungs burned, frost seared her lashes together, yet a fierce elation kindled within. She could wound him. Perhaps she could even... A column of ice erupted at her back, hurling her bodily against the cavern wall. Stars burst behind her eyes. The world blurred. She slid to the floor amid a fall of ice dust. The Night King loomed, spear raised for the killing thrust. Then a howl split the cavern, a sound of dire wolf fury, impossibly loud within the ice hall. Ghost? No. Larger, deeper, a harmony of many throats. The cavern mouth blossomed with emerald fire as dragons tore through the archway, wings unfurling in confined space with thunderclap violence. Dragonfire met glacial air in an explosion of steam. Scales the color of night and blood shimmered in torchlight conjured by their own fire. Drogon beat his wings once, and the concussion flattened every white within reach. Regal's emerald torrent liquefied the ceiling, raining molten ice. Viserion, a pale specter even in flame, screamed a challenge. Arya shielded her face. Heat kissed her cheeks, blessed warmth after endless deathly cold. The Night King did not retreat. He spun his spear and flung it, one perfect motion, straight at Regal's breast. Time stilled into shocked crystal facets. Needle flew from Arya's grasp of its own accord. No, she hurled it, though she would never recount the motion. Valyrian steel met the crystal spear mid-flight. The impact blossomed into a nova of sparks and shattered frost. Shards ricocheted, carving canyons through ice. The spear fell broken. Needle tumbled end over end into darkness. Arya's hand felt suddenly naked. Drogon's fire followed her throw, a living river of molten night. It struck the Night King head-on, engulfing him in a hurricane of flame. The cavern keened under the sudden heat, walls fracturing. Steam billowed thick enough to choke. Through that opaque veil, Arya glimpsed a silhouette, still standing, ice armor glowing white-hot. Fire alone would not end him. It never had, but cracks radiated from his feet, the lake's surface fissuring outward in spiderweb lines. Something vital had broken when Needle met the spear, perhaps the bond that leashed the army of the dead. The cavern floor heaved, frozen statues toppled, runes blazed brighter. The Night King raised one hand, perhaps to summon his retreating power, perhaps to command some last horror. His blue flame eyes dimmed, flickering beneath the torrent of dragon fire. Arya scrambled toward the place where Needle had vanished, hands skimming across slush and shattered armor. Her fingers closed around familiar leather. She rose, coughing steam. The dragons raged overhead, carving swathes of searing light. And in that crucible she felt the children's song again. An urging chord, a directive sung in the bones of the world. She turned needle-tipped toward the heart of the storm. The Night King stepped from the inferno, armor running like wax, then freezing anew with every stride. His flesh smoldered yet did not melt. Blue eyes locked onto Arya's, something ancient and furious blazing within. He drew a short blade of ice from his belt, crystalline edge keening like a frozen violin. Around them, whites disintegrated, robbed of command. He advanced. She mirrored each step. The cavern's roof groaned. Luminous fractures spidered overhead. Snow melted into vapor that rose as frosted halos around her shoulders. Every breath seared, every heartbeat hammered. But Arya was water dancing again, the music of death playing in her veins. They came together in a collision of myth and mortal will. Needle punctured the Night King's cuirass at a ragged seam. His ice blade met her ribs, sealed instantly in frost. For a heartbeat they were linked. Fire and ice, life and unrelenting void. Blue flame poured from his wound like liquid night, racing along Needle's hilt toward Arya's hand. She screamed as cold transcending cold surged through her. Yet she held firm, driving the blade deeper until it grated against the runes twisting in his spine. A sound burst from him, a soundless implosion, a vacuum devouring hope. Light collapsed inward. The Night King shattered, not into shards, but into swirling dust. Midnight snow spiraling upward in a pillar that whirled once around Arya before racing for the cavern roof. It struck the ceiling and vanished into a ring of cascading frost. Silence slammed home, broken only by the wheeze of melting ice. Regal landed beside Arya, SC, entering the air as though searching for the vanished foe. Drogon circled overhead, wing beats stirring a blizzard of steam. Somewhere far beyond, dawn might have been breaking. Arya collapsed to her knees. Needle lay smoking in her grasp, its fuller glowing red where the Night King's blood, icy as the void between stars, had kissed Valyrian steel. She pressed her forehead to the hilt, breath tearing in ragged gulps. Then the ice underfoot cracked. The lake, no longer bound by frozen spellcraft, began to shatter in earnest. Dragons roared warning. The cavern heaved. Arya forced herself upright, staggered toward Regal's lowered wing. She grasped a talon spike, and the great beast lifted her onto his scaled back with surprising gentleness. Drogon wheeled above, Drogon whose shadow once darkened Meereen, now a guardian in this secret tomb beneath the world. The cavern roof caved. Pale dawn speared through in lances of gold. Dragons leapt skyward into that growing light, bearing Arya stark out of the dark heart of winter. She did not look back until they soared above the ruined cliffs. Where the cavern once brooded now gaped a wound in the land, venting plumes of sapphire mist that curled into a spiral before fading. On the frozen horizon, the aurora danced, green and violet ribbons twisting like the children's last whisper. Somewhere below, the army of the dead lay in pieces, bereft of their master's will. For the first time she felt the sun on her face, faint though it was above the wall. Its warmth bled through her frost-numbed skin like a promise half-believed. She dared allow herself a breath of hope. Yet deep in her marrow lingered the echo of the Night King's gaze, and the knowledge that death's silence never vanished, only retreated, to gather strength beyond mortal sight. Arya Stark gripped the ridged spine of the dragon beneath her, eyes fixed southward toward Winterfell. War was not ended. It had merely turned its face. She would ride this fire to her family, to warn them, and to wield the shard of winter lodged now within the steel of her blade. She was water dancer, ghost walker, ice killer. She was no one and every Stark who ever bled for the North. And the game that had begun in the white hush beyond the wall was far from over. Wind carved glacial knives through the seams of Arya's cloak as Regal lifted above the shattered cavern. But she clung to the ridged spine without fear. The The dragon's scales glimmered where dawn's thin gold-kissed black ice melt. Pillars of steam followed in the slipstream, whispering away into the boundless pale above the wall. Below, ribbons of turquoise mist still spiraled from the ruptured lake, a brand upon the land, marking the place where the Night King had become dust. For long heartbeats she allowed the rhythm of wing beats to lull her, counting each steady downstroke and the rise that followed. Drogon swept ahead, the arrow point of their airborne wedge. Viserion circled to port like a ghost rendered flesh. Between them Regal flew true, as though some half-remembered instinct guided him south, home, toward Winterfell. Arya had laced her fingers around one of the bony spinal fins just behind the saddle ridge. Jon's boots had once gripped these same notches. She remembered the way he had laughed, an unguarded laugh, rare as summer in the north, when Regal first accepted him. She held that sound now as she held Needle, proof that warmth endured. Frost cracked from her lashes. She blinked until vision cleared. Far below, the wall's titanic shadow spilled west across frozen forests, even fractured where Viserion's blue fire had torn a whole month earlier. Its sheer immensity dwarfed the dragons in flight. Yet, in this newborn sunlight, the breach appeared as a dark wound slowly stitching itself in ice, and the sense of doom that once seeped from the yawning gap felt muted. Winter had lost its king. Still, she knew better than to think the war over. The whites lay shattered, but the dead outnumbered the living everywhere from the Frostfangs to Last Hearth. Without the Night Kings, they might crumble into feral packs, less coordinated, yet still lethal to every farmhold. And somewhere, scattered across half a continent, the remainder of the White Walkers, those who had not knelt in the cavern's ritual, lurked like shards of a broken mirror. Each retained a fraction of the same power, unbound now by hierarchy. Chaos could be worse than tyranny. A sudden lurch cut her thoughts. Regal banked sharply east to avoid a roosting spire of the wall, wings back-winging against an updraft. Cold tore at her exposed cheek where the hood had slipped aside. She righted herself, craning to keep Drogon in sight. But the great black dragon had vanished beyond a white plume rising from the breach. Viserion, too, dipped below the parapet line. Regal followed. They descended through wind that hissed across crenellations, snow swirling in tiny vortices. From this angle, the wall's inner walkway stretched like a silver ribbon into blue haze. Once manned by hundreds, it lay deserted save for a handful of shapes clustered around a lantern pole near Castle Black's tallest tower. Arya knew the posture of wary rangers, bows half-drawn, faces turned skyward at the sudden thunder of wings. Regal ignored them, gliding lower until talons crunched upon fresh-fallen snow at the courtyard's northern edge. Heat radiated from the dragon's flanks, turning nearby drifts to slush. Arya slid down, boots sinking ankle-deep. She staggered a step, then steadied herself against a scale broad as a shield. The courtyard seemed at once too small, the castle too mundane for the enormity of what she carried within. Ghost padded across the yard, white fur dusted gray by floating snow, red eyes narrowing. The dire wolf halted a few paces off, nose twitching. Jon stood behind him, cloak billowing, Longclaw bare in a gauntlet hand that trembled until he saw her truly. Arya, his voice cracked, half whisper, half prayer. She walked to him, each step measured, as though one misstep might shatter the dream. When they met, he opened his arms but hesitated at the sight of frostbite burns blooming along her jawline. She gripped his wrists first, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. It lasted a single heartbeat, perhaps two, because urgency flared like torchlight between them. The story must be told before Dread's ember cooled into complacency. He drew her toward the keep's entrance. Lanterns guttered on iron hooks, casting copper halos that stung her eyes after the blinding pale outside. As they passed beneath the arch, more men crowded close. Ed Tollett, his face gaunt and sharp, the smith wearing thick sealskin mitts, a cluster of wildlings who had sworn to stand with Jon. Their questions rose in a discordant rush. Arya shook her head. "Later," she rasped, and Jon guided her through to the hall where a balefire roared up a stone chimney. Heat slammed into her. Sensation flooded back. Painful pins along her thighs, the ache of bruised ribs, fingers tingling where she had clutched needle too tightly. She drew a shallow breath, coughed, and accepted a horn of warmed ale thrust into her grip by John's steward. Steam drifted from its lip in lazy serpents. She drank and felt warmth bloom outward through frozen marrow. When she spoke at last, her voice sounded foreign, thinner than she remembered. It was a forge. She saw confusion ripple across the crowded faces. Beneath the ice, she said, a place where he made them anew. John's eyes darkened. The Night King, she nodded. Then words poured free. How she had grown separated from the hunting ring, the White's march, the dreadful summons of the Night King's gaze. She told of the frozen lake and the victims sealed within, of children's whispers in the water and the crack that split the world when Valyrian steel met ice spear. She spoke of dragons turning night to day beneath the earth, and of the Night King's end, shattering into nothing that yet felt like seed blown to every horizon. No one spoke as she finished. Only the hearth's roar filled the hush. Ed drew a breath, then let it out in a slow wheeze. "Bugger me," he murmured. "Makes hard home sound like a kitten's scratch." He glanced toward John. "If the dead VE lost their master, we ought to be out gathering the pieces. Or burning them." "Not yet." Arya's tone silenced further debate. She unhooked Needle's sheath from her belt, lifted the sword for all to see. Along its fuller, a hairline fissure glittered faint silver where molten steel had cooled. Frost cobwebbed half the blade. The other half shimmered with a heat that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. "He's not wholly gone. Part of him is bound here. I can feel it." She did not mention the cold echo throbbing beneath her own breast, that faint resonance of alien magic lodged where the Night King's gaze had brushed her soul. Some truths might unravel courage too quickly. John extended a hand but hesitated. "May I?" She weighed the blade a moment before placing it across his palms. When his fingers closed around the grip, a blue spark jumped, singeing leather. He hissed. The hall gasped, yet he held on, studying the fracture. "It's alive," he whispered. "Not fire and blood, something else." Ghost growled, a low rumble like distant thunder. The direwolf's hackles bristled as though scenting an unseen predator. Arya felt the same tension radiate from John, a taut wire of dread and purpose twined in one. "We need the maesters," Ed muttered. "We need Bran." John's decision rang hard. And Samwell Tarly, there at Winterfell still, poring over every scroll Oldtown could spare. He handed Needle back carefully. "You'll ride south at first light," he told Arya. "With the dragons. I'll follow with every ranger we can spare." Arya shook her head. "No. The dragons carry us all, or we risk days while the dead roam masterless." She flicked a glance to the doorway, where Regal's shadow loomed beyond frost-fogged panes. "They'll bear more than two, if we lash on saddles." Her meaning was clear. A show of force, swift and terrible, across the north. Let every holdfast witness living flame and know who held back winter. John considered, thumb brushing the wolf's pommel of Longclaw. "We'd leave Castle Black thin." "It granted." "Castle Black's got me," he said deadpan, "and an armory rusting faster than my bones. We'll manage." A murmur of dour agreement rose. The wildling leader, a broad-shouldered giant called Torgon, nodded. "The free folk will hold with Dolorous Ed," he said. "Better here than letting Southron lords piss themselves when they see us." John's mouth twitched, half a smile, then vanished behind worry. He turned back to Arya. "You're certain he's gone?" She opened her lips to say yes, but the word withered. "The Night King is dust," she said slowly, "but his shape might be taken up again, if the bindings are reforged. That's what the forge was." She laid a hand over the crack in Needle. "I broke the mold, but shards remain. Someone could gather them. Then we won't give them time." Resolve etched lines at the corners of John's mouth. He called for parchment, quill, and his map of the north. Lanterns were dragged closer, illuminating the curling coastline and cluster of holdfast sigils penned in black. Arya observed in silence as he drew swift strokes. Routes along the King's Road, ravens to White Harbor and Last Hearth, riders to Deepwood Motte. He dispatched Torgon to Tormund's camp at the Shivering Sea Rim, instructing that every free folk hearth guard the realms of men. When the final lines connected, the north resembled a web of steel spider threads all anchored at Winterfell. Jon circled its name twice. "We make our stand where the hot springs meet the godswood," he said, "where our roots are deepest." Arya traced the ink with her gaze. "We'll need dragon glass and Valyrian blades on every path." She hesitated. "And I know where to find more. The children showed me." She closed her eyes, recalling the vision. A ravine east of the Frostfangs, black stone obsidian columns thrust up like broken teeth. A vein of frozen fire untapped since the age of the first men. "We can mine it while the land still freezes. If thaw comes, shafts will flood." Jon exhaled, the sound of a man whose burdens multiplied but whose back refused to break. One thing at a time. First Winterfell, then the mines. They slept little that night. Arya lay in a narrow bunk high in the tower, ghost curled at the foot like a silent sentinel. She could not settle. Each time her breathing slowed, images rose. Eyes like cracking ice, the Night King's finger touching her brow, the children's song echoing in the black water. She felt the crack in her blade mirrored by a fissure within, a door ajar. Something cold pressed against it from the other side, patient as frost. She rose when the first gray sliver of dawn seeped under the shutters. Ghost's ears twitched, but he did not open his eyes. Snow drifted past the narrow window in lazy spirals. She watched until color bled into the sky, then donned her cloak and went to saddle the dragons. They flew with the sun low at their backs, setting Castle Black ablaze in gold and crimson. Drogon loosed a roar that rattled windows along towers still nursing ancient cracks from the last siege. Regal and Viserion echoed with lighter timbers, harmonizing like distant war horns. Jon rode Drogon, Arya upon Regal once more, and behind her clung Samwell Tarly. Pale, round-eyed, whispering prayers he claimed were for the dragon's comfort, but Arya suspected, also for his own. Viserion bore Gilly and little Sam strapped in a makeshift cradle of boiled leather, and an iron-backed crate of scrolls lashed tight with winter wool rope. Beneath them the north passed in white silence, the stone circle of Queen's Crown half buried beneath drifts. The Umber's lonely keeps huddled like black scars, patches of forest where dead game lay stiff, uneaten, testimony that hunters, human or otherwise, had vanished. Here and there thin trails of smoke curled from isolated crofts, stubborn sparks of life amid the great hush. At each such plume Arya's chest tightened. She wanted to swoop low, to shout reassurance that winter's worst had broken. But time pressed like a blade against throat. Midday found them above the last river's meandering course. Jon signaled a glide. The dragons angled wings and slipped into long, lazy spirals that carried them lower. The sound of rushing water rose, muffled beneath ice lids that groaned. At a bend where the current carved cliffs from granite, a motley army bivouacked. Karstark banners hung limp, wildling spearmen in tattered wolf pelts, Manderly archers in sea-green cloaks. Fires smoked. Horses stamped and whickered under strange dragon scent. When Drogon's shadow swept across camp, panic rippled, men scattering, shields raised. But Jon dipped Drogon's wing in salute, and the dragons settled on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river ford. Arya brought Regal down beside him, soft as falling snow. Viserion alighted further off, mindful of his siblings' flame-slick tails. Sam scrambled down, knees buckling, then straightened with a shy grin. "Better than ladders," he said, though his skin looked green. Jon slid from Drogon's neck and strode toward the nearest banner where Lyanna Mormont stood in fur-trimmed mail, barking orders at a Karstark captain twice her height. At Jon's approach, she offered a curt nod. "Good to see you haven't frozen atop that beast, my king." Her gaze shifted to Arya. "And Lady Arya Stark returns with the wind. I hope your blade bit deep." Arya unclipped needle, turned it so the fractured fuller caught sunlight. Lyanna's sharp eyes widened. "7 hells," she breathed. Then she grinned, a fierce gleam. "If you can break the Night King's toys, We can break the scraps left crawling. She tossed her braids over a fur-clad shoulder. We march with you, though half the lads would rather ride those winged lizards. Set foot on Drogon and you might lose it, Jon quipped, voice lighter than Arya had heard in months. Yet his smile faded as he surveyed the camp. How many? 400 Mormont spears, 300 Karstark, a host of free folk I lost count of at 600. She shrugged one small shoulder. More straggle in each day. They say the dead just stopped, fell apart where they stood. Her eyes hardened. Doesn't mean the war's done. Fear's a weed. We cut it out by the root. Jon squeezed her mailed forearm. Tonight we feast. At dawn we join us under Winterfell's walls. He raised his voice. Send ravens to the Dreadfort to Barrowton. The dragons fly for the direwolf banner. Any who still cower shall answer why. Lyanna's grin returned. Aye, my king. As Jon moved off to confer with captains, Arya wandered to the river edge. The ice near shore lay shattered by hooves. Beneath, swift current flickered like sword metal. She knelt, trailing a glove through powdery snow, letting the hush settle. But the hush did not settle. From somewhere in her mind a cold whisper twisted. A memory or prophecy? She could not tell. She saw again the Night King's dust spinning upward, vanishing through the cavern roof. Dust carried on wind. Where did it fall? To what seedbed? Footsteps crunched behind her. Sam lowered himself beside her, breath puffing clouds. Jon says you saved us all, he murmured. She watched water swirl. I ended him. That's not the same as saving. She turned, searching his round, earnest face. Sam, in Old Town, did you ever read of more than one Night King? Of others after the first? He chewed his lip. Legends differ. Some say the Night King was a title, passed like a crown of ice. Others claim the original was nameless, that imitators rose but none matched his power. He swallowed. Why? She looked south, where Winterfell lay unseen beyond low hills. Because dust drifts, she whispered, and there are men eager to breathe power, however foul. Sam followed her gaze, eyes wide. Then we must bar every hall, he said, before anyone can breathe it in. The approach to Winterfell felt both endless and swift. Endless, because anticipation coiled tighter at every mile. Swift, because the dragon's wings devoured distance. They soared over the wolfswood as twilight painted treetops ash blue, then banked east toward the towers rising above steam-veiled fields. Smoke curled from every chimney, carrying notes of alder and pine. The hot springs bled mist across snow in rippling waves. Torchlines adorned the outer walls. Trumpets sounded as the dragons descended, brassy notes trembling on frigid air. Courtyard clamor followed, horses rearing, hounds barking, steel scraping from scabbards. But when Arya dismounted, she saw only faces alight with wonder rather than terror. Bran waited in his carved weirwood chair by the gatehouse arch, cloak pooling like feathers around frail shoulders. His pale eyes gleamed moonstone in torchlight. She knelt before him, surprised at the lump in her throat. He lifted a hand, brushed her cheek as though confirming she was flesh. I felt the wind change, he murmured, voice calm as still water. The others lost their song for a moment, but echoes remain. He turned his gaze to Needle's fracture, tracing the crack without touching. There is a path within you now, he said softly. A hinge between worlds, opened by his hand when he marked you. He looked up. We must close it. How? By filling it with light. His answer seemed both cryptic and self-evident. Bran lifted his eyes to the ramparts where Sansa stood, hair unbound, cloak of dark crimson wolf fur shivering in the wind. Relief softened Sansa's face when she saw Arya. Next moment she was descending stone steps, skirts hitched. They met halfway across the courtyard, colliding in an embrace that cracked ribs and thawed fears. After, inside the great hall thick with heat and human noise, Arya offered the full tale once more. Bran's expression altered not at all, save for a faint narrowing of eyes when she described the cracks in the lake and the obsidian daggers embedded in each corpse. When she finished, he said, "The children built their first white shadow with dragon glass driven into the breast of a man. The Night King refined the art by many such sacrifices. If needle shattered the spear that funneled his power, you sundered the latticework of bindings below the lake. But magic bleeds sideways." He fixed her with a look ancient beyond his years. "Where does blood go when the heart bursts? Everywhere." John slammed a fist upon the table. "Then we hunt every shard. Every White Walker left roaming." Bran shook his head. "Not all shards take shape as walkers. Some may seep into bone left to rot, into blades forged long before memory. Even men who crave strength can carry splinters unknowingly. We cannot fight them all with swords alone." "What then?" Sansa demanded. "Are we to live in dread each time winter wind rises?" "Not dread," Bran said. "Vigilance and choice." He gestured to Arya. "She carries a bridge between life and death. We can study it, learn how to seal others." Sam leaned forward, excitement overtaking fear. "Old Town's forbidden texts speak of binding wards, runes set in rings of obsidian and powdered bone. If we traced such wards around Winterfell's crypts, to keep spirits out," Bran supplied, "and to keep some things in." He stared into hearth flames, unblinking. Jon rubbed eyes red-rimmed from sleepless days. "Make your wards. Study the crack in needle. But gather forces, too. We leave nothing to chance." He turned to Arya. "I'll need you to ride with Gendry to the Dragonglass Gorge you saw. Take Hound's little sibling squad." Arya raised an eyebrow. "The Hound? He's here." Limp but loud. Jon almost smiled. "Said he wouldn't let any little bird freeze. Or any wolf either." He poured dark ale into her half-empty cup. "You'll like his company about as much as you did before." Arya snorted. "Could do worse." She considered. "Gendry will need proper maps, axes, rope, and dragon flame to melt the surface." She glanced at Bran. "Can Regal burn without waking whatever sleeps beneath?" Bran's reply was slow. "It was forged in fire once. Fire unmakes and remakes." They left the conversation there, for the hall had grown loud with returning captains and fresh news. A white pack seen staggering near Carhold had collapsed when sun rose. Wildling scouts found a White Walker frozen mid-stride, blue gaze gone dull. Conversely, a farmstead west of Last Hearth reported hoofbeats in the night and animals gutted with unnatural frost. Hairs on Arya's neck prickled. Echoes indeed. That night Arya dreamed. She walked through the Godswood under aurora skies, the heart tree's red leaves drifting in spiral patterns that matched the rune at the lake. Snow buried her ankles. The weirwood's face wept black sap that turned to obsidian tears upon the bark. She followed a trail of them to the crypts, but each stone effigy of her ancestors stood open-eyed, frozen tears streaking faces carved to seem asleep. Beneath their lids burned faint rings of blue. Atop Rickard Stark's cold brow a crown of frost flowered, petals opening into jagged spears. She reached to pluck it, and the heart tree's face called her name in the Night King's voice. She jolted upright, heart jackhammering. Moonlight paled the chamber. Needle lay across her knees, blade quivering faintly, frost creeping from the crack like ivy. She shoved to her feet, stomping boots on flagged stone to calm her racing pulse, then padded to the window slit. The sky outside was clear, save for one slender thread of pale green light far north, a remnant of aurora or something else. Below, torches bobbed along ramparts, sentries pacing. One figure lingered near the Godswood gate, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning on a two-handed sword, the Hound. She pulled a cloak about her shoulders and descended. He heard her crunching steps long before she saw his scarred visage turn. "Wolf girl," he grunted, "was wondering which dragon dropped you on my head today." His breath steamed through ruined lips. "They brought me to strike fear," she said lightly, though her hands still trembled. "Is it working?" He snorted.
"Ive smelled vers."
He nodded toward the black-twined branches overhead. "These bloody trees whisper louder each winter. Figured I'd hear what secrets they're spitting before men start killing one another again." His dark eyes searched her face. You look like shit. She shrugged. Killed a king of death. Took a toll. I've killed kings before. They bleed like pigs. But his tone softened. You get some sleep. I can't. She adjusted the cloak. Dreams bite. She met his gaze challenging. And you? Burns itch. He flexed a hand partially hidden by fingerless gloves. But there's ale enough. He reached into a satchel, produced a flask, extended it. She accepted, sipped, coughed at harsh pine notes. They shared silence broken only by distant banners rattling in wind. After a time he said, Your dragon trip tomorrow. You're sure about that gorge? I saw it as clearly as I see you. She hesitated. But visions twist. We'll need a scout ahead. That could be you. He spat snowmelt. Thought you wanted me for my charm. She smiled, small. Your charm might scare shadows. He grunted. I'll ready the gear. He turned toward the armory, paused. Try sleeping again, girl. No dream can hurt you worse than truth. He strode off, leaving footprints that filled quietly as snow sifted down. She breathed deep of cedar smoke, felt the hush settle heavy but less menacing. Then she turned toward the woods and walked between flank guards of alder and ash until she stood before the heart tree's face. It watched her, expression both mournful and serene. Sap glistened black in moonlight but did not fall. She pressed 2 fingers to the bark, as the Night King had pressed to her brow. The wood felt neither warm nor cold, merely alive, pulsing faintly with sap. I am Arya Stark, she whispered. I wear many faces but keep one heart. Guard it, old gods. She closed her eyes, letting silence wrap her. When she opened them, the tree's carved mouth seemed to soften. Perhaps it was only moon shadows, but she felt steadier as she walked back toward the keep, past torchlit walls where men of many banners stood side by side. At dawn the dragons rose again, their departure scattering ravens like black petals. Arya rode regal with the hound behind, arms like iron bands locking across her waist. Gendry manned Viserion's saddle, a massive warhammer slung at his back. Across the 3rd dragon Drogon, Jon carried a flight harness weighted with obsidian mining picks and coils of rope. They bore southward first, skirting the hills, then veered northwest toward the Frostfangs where peaks knifed the horizon. The air sharpened, tasting of storm-ready snow. Clouds stacked like fortresses ahead. By midday they sighted jagged crags puncturing tree lines, slate cliffs iced white. Arya felt the memory tug stronger, as though an invisible tether guided them. She signaled a descent. Regal banked, wings creaking against biting wind, and dropped through ragged mist into a valley flanked by serrated ridges. Below, a river frozen solid looped like a silver serpent. At a bend near a domed rise, black columns thrust from snow, crystalline surfaces catching meager sunlight. The ravine. They landed on a stony shelf overlooking the site.
No footprints marked virgin snow.
The air felt heavy, charged, primal. Arya slid off regal, boots crunching onto basalt-peppered ground. The hound dismounted behind, scanning cliffs. Looks like a pile of shit left by giants, he muttered. But his eyes narrowed at the obsidian pillars. Big shards. Gendry joined, breath puffing. If that's all dragon glass, we can arm every soul in the north. Excitement colored his tone, but a furrow of wariness creased his brow. Feels wrong though, like the air's humming. Arya knelt, brushed snow aside to reveal a slick black veneer. Fragments of obsidian scattered like broken teeth. She lifted one, thumb stroking razor edge. A hum indeed, subtle vibration under skin, reminiscent of needles thrum. She pocketed the shard. We mine shape then ward, she said. Jon strode closer, surveying. Set a perimeter first. Hound, take a pass around the rise. Gendry, unload gear. He extended gloved hands, one resting briefly on Arya's shoulder. You sure? She nodded. This path I chose. They made camp against a rock face, dragons roosting above like gargoyle sentinels. Snow began at dusk, flakes glittering like ash. The hound returned, face grim. Found tracks, he said. Not human. Deep prints, three-toed. He spat. Smells like rot. John's jaw tightened. A white. If so, it's moving. The hound eyed the darkening woods. Keep fires high. As night settled, they established torches in a ring, shadows dancing across black pillars. The hound took first watch, sword across knees. Arya sat with Gendry by a small brazier, mapping extraction routes. Snow thickened, muffling sounds until only occasional pops of sap crackling in flames broke hush. Then a howl tore the night, high, shrill, nothing like Ghost's thunder. Dragons woke instantly, wings mantling. The howl came again, nearer, joined by a wet, rasping breath. Torches flickered. Arya sprang up, drawing needle. Frost coated the crack in the blade as though eager for battle. Jon unslung Longclaw, voice carrying, "Stand firm." Regal hissed, releasing a plume of green-tinged smoke. In firelight, the ravine's shadows deeper twisted. From between two columns lumbered a shape taller than a man, bone-white, flesh stretched thin over spindled limbs. Its eyes glowed ember blue, but it did not rush. It stopped at Torchline's edge, tilting its head as though listening to an inner voice, or scenting something more potent than fear. Behind it shuffled two smaller figures, wrist bones clacking where flesh hung in tatters. Yet their gaze fixed not on the living. They stared at the obsidian pillars. Gendry whispered, "They're drawn to it." Arya felt again the forge beneath the lake, the way each corpse pierced by dragon glass had become vessel. She realized with a chill that this ravine was not mere resource. It was nursery. The dead sensed the memory of birth in the stone. "Back!" Jon commanded quietly. "We torch them." But Arya's gaze snagged on the largest creature's skull-like visage. Behind its hollow sockets flickered not simple white shine but something more intent, more knowing. Shard of winter, Bran had warned. Echo of the king. If dust had drifted, perhaps it settled here in this valley of knives. She stepped forward before thought could catch fear. The white hissed, stepping to meet her. Snow hissed beneath its talons. At 7 paces she halted, raising needle so sun-gold flame glinted on the crack. The white's blue gaze darted to the blade. Frost blossomed along its own arm in mirror fractals. She whispered, "Vala Morgulis," and plunged. Needle punched through brittle sternum. Frost raced the fuller toward her glove, then reversed, drawn inward as heat from the fire crack met something deeper. The white convulsed, jaw gaping in soundless howl, and exploded into dust. Blue sparks flitted upward like dying stars. The smaller whites shrieked, flailing. Drogon unleashed a short gout of flame. They crumbled to ash. Silence crashed. Snow continued falling, gently blanketing new ash. Arya withdrew needle, crack glowing molten for an instant before cooling. She breathed, heart hammering against ribs. Behind her, Jon's relief was palpable, though he said only, "Nice toss," recalling her earlier deed. The hound cursed, stomped snow over lingering embers. They took little rest after that. Through the dark hours more whites arrived, singly or in pairs, drawn by silent call. Each came for the obsidian, ignoring living flesh until steel or fire destroyed them. By dawn the ring of torches had become a charred grave of ash and fractured bone. Yet the numbers seemed finite. As the eastern sky blushed rose, no further shapes emerged. Jon wiped soot from his brow. "We mine fast," he said. "Then salt the valley with dragon fire until nothing dead will stand." Arya agreed, but unease coiled. The whites' behavior revealed a plan beyond mere hunger. They sought the source of their making. If some will guided them still, fragmented yes but purposeful, then war had only shifted fronts. 2 weeks later obsidian convoys rolled across snowy fields toward Winterfell. Sledges piled high with black shards wrapped in oilcloth against chipping, iron bands securing heavier blocks. Dragons alternated between watchful patrols and ferry service, dropping loaded nets to waiting carts. At night forges blazed along Winterfell's outer bailey, hammer strokes ringing like bells of defiance. Gendry oversaw smithies night and day, shaping arrowheads, daggers, spear tips. The air stank of oil, ash, and wet leather. Yet to Arya the scent was hope. Inside the crypts, Sam and Bran worked side by side, chalking runes across stone floors, inlaid with ground glass and dried weirwood bark. Glowstones imported from the sisters pulsed faint emerald among the wards, creating an eerie light show that set ravens quirking in agitation above the battlements. Some said stranger things moved in the shadows. Ghostly children glimpsed out of the corner of one's eye, guiding chalk-smudged maesters to correct a curve here, a symbol there. Arya visited once, left quickly after a whisper brushed her ear in a language not meant for mortal throats. The north answered Jon's call. Columns of riders arrived daily, banners snapping stiff. Glover's saws, Manderley's merman, Riswell's black horse, even House Reed, reptiles emblazoned on swamp green. Lady Meege Mormont led bearskins ringing axes, her roar rivaling giants. Within days, Winterfell swelled to bursting. Tents spread into fields, cookfires like constellations. Children raced between horse lines. Old men whittled arrow shafts. Women spun raw wool into braided rope for siege ladders. All awaited word of what came next. Arya joined the Hound on patrols along the White Knife Gorge, hunting straggling whites. Each kill left her blade humming stronger, the crack glowing briefly before cooling. She practiced meditation taught by faceless men to quiet the echo in her marrow, to keep doors shut. Yet sometimes at dusk she felt a tug northward, subtle but persistent, as though shards of the king groped for the hinge he had made within her. Sansa confronted her one evening while they sparred in the yard beneath low-slung clouds. Arya had been drilling with a new obsidian dagger, testing weight. Sansa watched, then spoke quietly. "Does the blade speak to you?" Arya paused mid-thrust. "Not in words." "Then in what?" "A pull. Like direction." She straightened. "I'm trying to use it, not be used." Sansa touched her sleeve. "We protect each other," she said. "If the pull grows stronger, tell me. Tell Bran." "I will." Sansa's blue gaze lingered. "And if it pulls you away?" Arya forced a smile. "Then chase me, sister." On the 21st night after Arya's return, amid a storm that shrieked like ice wraiths across parapets, Bran summoned the council to the hall. Lightning forked beyond shuttered windows, throwing skeleton shadows. Maesters, lords, and captains gathered under flickering sconces. Jon stood at the head of the table, hands braced on carved wolf heads. Arya took her place beside him, needle across her knees. The Hound lurked near a barrel of mead, scowl fixed. Bran spoke in a voice calm yet resonant. "The dead gather once more in the far north. I have seen their paths converge on a valley girded in aurora flames." He closed eyes, lashes pale against hollow cheeks. "There is a fissure where the Night King's dust composes itself, swirling into form. It hungers for a vessel." Silence draped the hall. Jon's knuckles whitened on the table edge. "How long?" "Days. Perhaps a moon's turn at most. But time bends where magic pools. Could be sooner." Arya felt the pull within intensify, like a taut string vibrating. Bran's gaze shifted to her. "The hinge in you resonates with the dust. We must close it before the vessel rises, or draw it to where we can strike." Sam coughed. "If we could entice the forming entity south, into the wards." "Not south," Bran countered. "The wards restrain spirits, not flesh. A new Night King would be flesh, until slain anew." Jon's gaze hardened. "Then we march north once more. Dragons and men. End this before it begins." Murmurs swept the hall. Dread, courage, logistics of rations, horses, weather. Arya spoke above the clamor. "We cut the roots this time. Salt the earth." Bran inclined his head. "Take the obsidian hammer Gendry forged," he advised. "When the dust reconvenes, strike the fissure beneath at the moment of birth. Dragon glass will shatter the nexus." Sansa stepped forward. "And Winterfell?" "Stands guarded," Bran said. "The wards grow stronger each night." Lady Mormont slammed her fist to her chest. "The bears go north." So the choice was made. Messengers sprinted into Blizzard Scroll, horns blared summons. By dawn, a vanguard of 2,000 spears, 500 archers, 3 giants, and every living dragon set forth. Jon rode at the column's point on a black courser, cloak snapping. Arya rode regal overhead, needles crack bandaged in leather to mute the thrum. The hound preferred horseback, muttering oaths at the notion of dragon saddles. They crossed the milkwater where ice flows ground like millstones, then turned northeast, past the rime flats where ghost herds once wandered. The land grew bleak, stone ridges slick with rime, forests petrified by frost. Yet signs of gathering death marked their route. Spirals of charred ash near hilltops where whites had combusted without flame, patches of snow melted to reveal bones arranged in runes. At night, auroras writhed overhead, green serpents coiling in silent dance. The closer they came, the stronger Arya felt the hinge within twist. On the 5th day, they crested a ridge overlooking a vast hollow valley. Snow blew in whirlpools across cracked earth, and at its center a whirl of gray dust churned like a storm contained, swirling faster than any wind. Lightning branched from ground to sky within the vortex, flashing blue. The sight stole breath.
Jon signaled halt.
Troops formed ranks behind snow walls, shields braced against biting wind that radiated from the maelstrom. Dragons circled above, flames lighting thunderheads. Bran's ravens wheeled, a living curtain. The ground shook beneath Arya's boots as she dismounted. The dust storm throbbed, pulses synchronous with the ache in her breast. She gripped needle. The crack glowed through leather binding. Gendry hefted a warhammer half again as tall as Arya, its head carved of polished obsidian veined with molten silver. He met her gaze. "Right time," he said. She nodded. Together, flank. D by Jon and the hound, they advanced down the slope. Sub-zero wind screamed, driving ice shards that left welts. Yet they pressed on until the gale forced even dragons to hover at distance. Within 50 paces, the dust gained definition, humanoid outlines forming in the whirl, eyes igniting like twin suns behind smoke. Arya felt the hinge flare, a door rattling on gusts. Pain speared her skull. She staggered. Jon caught her arm. "Arya!" She gritted teeth. "Closer!" Gendry raised the hammer. Lightning grounded to its head, crackling then dissipating. He roared, dug heels, and hurled the weapon. It tumbled end over end, obsidian flashing, and struck the heart of the vortex precisely as a skeletal hand reached outward. A sound like worlds splitting erupted. Blue light imploded, drawing dust, wind, and snow inward. Air rushed past, sucking breath. The valley floor heaved and cracked. Needle's leather binding burned away, exposing molten fissure. The hinge within Arya's soul snapped shut with an audible pop. She screamed, not in pain but release. When vision cleared, the valley lay still. Dust settled as fine powder across glazed earth. At center remained only shattered fragments of obsidian hammer embedded in ground, each shard pulsing faint sapphire then fizzling to cold black. The air felt warm, impossibly, like early spring. Jon exhaled a long-held breath. The hound spat a curse that might have been relief. Gendry retrieved remaining pieces of his weapon, cradling them like fallen comrades. Arya straightened. The pull was gone. In its absence, calm spread. She met Jon's eyes. In them she saw dawn over Winterfell, saw a future maybe free of frost-forged tyrants. She smiled softly. He returned it. Above, Regal swept low, wings dipping in salute. The sky beyond throbbed with sunrise hues, scattering the last tatters of darkness. Soldiers on the ridge lifted spears, cheers carried on wind. The war for life's right to dawn was not ended. Wars seldom truly end, but a chapter closed, sealed with obsidian and courage. Arya Stark turned homeward, the hinge within her now locked by will and fire. She would carry the story not as burden but torch, lighting paths for those who followed. For winter would come again, as seasons must, but memory of this day would stand like the wall itself, warning and promise that death may walk but life will dance. Dawn bled pale peach across the barren valley where dust still drifted, and Arya lingered atop the ridge to watch that slow birth of daylight. Every few heartbeats the wind shifted, lifting a fragile spiral of ash that glimmered in the low sun before surrendering to gravity again. The silence felt heavy, the hush of a forge cooling after the last sword has been quenched. It smelled of lightning, scorched air, and the faint, sharp tang of obsidian dust. A single step forward would carry her down the slope into the cradle of the storm just broken, but she stayed where she was, one hand resting on Regal's foreleg as though drawing courage from the dragon's slow, tidal breathing. Below, Jon conferred with commanders in low voices. The sprawl of their army spread like a dark braid across the snow, banners limp, men kneeling to tighten saddle girths or break the crust from frozen bread. They had won a battle of strange magics, yet the very shape of the victory unsettled them. Nothing to burn, no corpse to bury, no shattered weapon to nail above a gate. Merely dust, and the uneasy sense that a door long barred had been forced partly, then wedged shut again by hands not fully mortal. Snow began to fall, soft, indecisive flakes that melted on Regal's scales but took purchase on Arya's hair. She brushed them free with a glove and turned to descend. Each stride down the slope felt lighter, as though some unseen weight had slipped from her shoulders. Yet beneath the relief thrummed a wariness so keen it hummed in her teeth. The hinge within her, that inner seam Bran claimed was now locked, lay dormant, but she feared the quiet. Locks, after all, invited keys. At the foot of the ridge Jon met her, long claw sheathed, frost silvering the wolf pommel. His eyes searched her face. Whatever he saw seemed to reassure him. He squeezed her forearm. "We'll break camp and fall back to Winterfell," he said. "Supply lines grow thin this far north, and the men have earned hearth fires." "Aye," she answered, scanning the valley one last time. "Salt the ground. Regal and Drogon will see to it. Viserion, too, if he can be coaxed." Jon attempted a wry smile. Dragons are like brothers, quick to fight, hard to command. She thought of Robb, of Bran, of Rickon running down Winterfell's halls. It struck her with unexpected force, the sudden yearning for simpler battles of snowball ambushes and stolen pies. She shook it off, nodding. "I'll stand watch while they burn." She glanced at the gathering clouds. Storms building. Best hurry. The dragons came in low, sweeping embers from their throats that danced across the churned earth. Fire met dust with soft puffs, like breath-extinguishing candle flame. But as the passes filled with acrid smoke, a different smell rose, sweet, almost perfumed. Sam, standing at her elbow, frowned into the haze. "Smells of sap," he murmured, "as if the ground remembers forests." His brow puckered. "Or something older." She was about to answer when the hound trudged past, cloak flapping. "Smells like piss pot to me," he growled, hoisting a bundle of pickaxes onto a wagon. "If you philosophers are done sniffing, some of us fancy food before our guts crawl up to eat our ribs." He cast her a glance that was almost fond. "You and your dragon fancy dance have a new admirer, girl. Half the lads swear you carve whites with moonlight. Tell them moonlight costs extra," she quipped, then clapped his shoulder in passing. By mid-morning the valley was a haze of rising steam, blackened earth cooling beneath an ashen crust. Arya joined Jon in leading the column southward along a ridge line that offered enough solid ground for the supply wagons. Scouts fanned ahead on shaggy garrons, and ravens ghosted above like drifting punctuation marks. The march settled into its rhythm, creak of leather, crunch of hooves, distant wing beats of dragons gliding in lazy spirals. Yet the hush that had followed the battle clung to the company. Men spoke in low voices, as though fearing to wake some hidden god still slumbering under the ice. That evening they camped in a shallow basin ringed by scraggle pines. Fires flickered between mounded snow walls. The cookpots bubbled with stew made from dried hare, barley, and the last of the onions carted north. Arya claimed a patch near one fire where Gendry and Podrick Payne fussed over a dented helm. She sat cross-legged, polishing needle with a cloth soaked in oil and powdered ash. The crack hummed faintly under her thumb, warm as a sleeping ember. She traced it twice, then forced herself to stop. Across the flame the hound gnawed a bone, grease shining on his scarred cheek. "You keep rubbing that thing and you'll polish a hole clear through," he muttered. "It listens," she said, not joking. Gendry glanced up, expression half wary, half amused. "Let's hope it listens better than half the lords back home. They'll flap about ancient pacts and shipping grain levies while we're still sweeping up dust." Podrick nodded, then bent over the helm again, cheeks glowing red in the fire's halo. Arya watched the younger man's determined focus and felt a pang of nostalgia. Pod, still the earnest squire, older now yet always chasing some measure of valor. She reached into her satchel and drew out a freshly forged obsidian dagger, its hilt wrapped in bear fur. "For you," she said, tossing it across. Pod nearly dropped the helm, snatching the weapon. He eyed the blade with awe. "I've never owned a blade this fine. Keep it sharp, and keep yourself alive. Sansa will be cross if I return you in pieces." Gendry coughed a laugh. Even the hound's mouth twitched. But beyond the joking, Arya sensed their worry. The realm was shaped by ripples unseen, dust traveling on wind, the hinge in her chest attuned to every echo. She finished wiping needle, sheathed it, and rose. "I'm walking perimeter," she said. Torches marked the camp's borders, each guarded by a sentry with obsidian-tipped spear. Snow had ceased, leaving the night starkly clear. Above, the King's Road of stars stretched from horizon to horizon. She paced between watchfires until she reached the southern end, where a shallow ravine cradled a trickle of black water. The sentry posted, one of Lyanna Mormont's bears, a man named Otter, nodded as she approached. "Quiet?" she asked. "Nothing but wind." He tapped the spears but into icy soil. "But the wind's strange. Sometimes it whistles a tune." His brow knit. "Sounds like, well, like someone humming through teeth." Arya listened. She heard only the faint whine of cold air skimming stone. Still, she believed him. Magic once sung across this land. Perhaps it lingered like foxfire after a storm. She thanked him, then hopped across the streamlet, following its bank a dozen paces where the camp's torch glow faded. Here the world narrowed to moonlight, smell of pine pitch, and the distant muffled shuffle of horses. She exhaled, letting her shoulders sink. A crack echoed, ice shearing, sharp as splitting bone. She spun, hand on needle. But the sound seemed to have come from within, a sudden vibration along the blade still sheathed. Then a faint sensation skittered behind her eyes, the barest prickle. It faded before she could name it. She waited, breath held. Nothing moved. The night lay still. When she returned to her bedroll hours later, she did not sleep soundly. Dreams nudged at the edge of consciousness, photographs half-developed, colors inverted. In one she stood atop the wall alone while below a river of black water flowed south, carrying shards of blue glass that winked like eyes. In another she held needle toward a mirror, and the crack opened wider, splitting the steel like a mouth to speak. But no sound emerged, only a swirl of frost that crawled over the glass and swallowed her reflection whole. She woke before dawn, throat dry, heart racing. Ghost dozed nearby. He lifted his head, ears cocked. She stroked his fur, grateful for the warmth, then rose to douse her face in snow. Across camp cooks stoked fires, the smell of oats and honey brewing. She ate sparingly, then buckled sword and prepared to break camp. 3 more days their column wound south. Forests thickened. Ground rose and fell in gentle hummocks blanketed by knee-high snow. The hush began to lift. Men sang marching songs. Women lugging water barrels gossiped about the harvest stores in Bear Island. Children scampered after blown tufts of frost fluff that looked like dandelion seeds. It felt almost like peacetime, except for the dragons overhead, their shadows gliding across white fields like dark clouds. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they reached the King's Road proper, a ribbon of packed ice running straight to Winterfell's gate. Scouts returned with news of clear passage. No whites, no raiders. Yet as they pressed on, strange signs surfaced. In a low dell, a herd of elk lay dead, bodies hardly touched by rot. Blue frost ringed around nostrils. A mile farther, An abandoned cabin bore glyphs scratched into its lintel, spirals and whirls like those carved into the cavern lake, drawn in what appeared to be ash mixed with pine sap. Gendry muttered a prayer. Jon ordered torches set to the place, flames curling skyward as the company marched on. That night Bran met them astride a shaggy gray pony, escorted by a cadre of guards and Maester Wolkan riding a shag-haired mule. They had ridden hard from Winterfell to meet the returning host. Bran's presence rippled awe and discomfort. Small folk knelt or crossed themselves, while hardened warriors eyed him as one might regard a distant lightning storm, beautiful, terrible, beyond comprehension. In Jon's command tent Bran unfolded a crude map, ink blots marking rivers, ridges, and the valley where dust had gathered. His finger drifted southeast to a symbol scrawled in red. "Here," he said, voice barely louder than the hiss of the brazier. "Dust travels on the wind, but wind follows currents of power laid when the world was young. There are nodes, sinkholes of magic, across the land. I have found another where traces converge." Arya leaned over the map. The mark lay near the neck, west of the King's Road, in the ragged marches where hills bled into morass. "Moat Cailin," she murmured. "Near enough," Bran confirmed. "A ruin saturated in iron and blood, where first men clashed with the children's wards. The dust is drifting toward that place." Jon's shoulders slumped. "We've only just carved a path back," he said quietly. Bran's pale eyes lifted. "What is forged may be melted, but iron must strike while metal's hot." He turned to Arya. "The hinge within you is still closed, yet it resonates when dust gathers. You feel it." She nodded slowly. "In pulses, distant, like thunder beyond mountains." "It guides us," Bran said, "but we must beware. If the dust coalesces fully at Moat Cailin, it could anchor to remnants of old sorcery. Obsidian alone may not break it once more." Gendry cleared his throat. "Then what does?" "A union of war and peace," Bran replied, cryptic as ever. "Iron and weirwood, fire and green blood." He regarded Arya again. "You will need the children's aid." She swallowed. "They are stories now, ghosts in the trees. Ghosts answer calls." A faint smile touched his lips. "And you have walked beneath their lake, felt their sap in your veins." Jon straightened, decision settling like chainmail. "We split forces. Main host continues to Winterfell for rest and resupply. A smaller spear marches on Moat Cailin. Swift, light, ready to strike." Lyanna Mormont thumped her fist on the trestle table. "The bears ride with the spear," she declared. The hound grunted. "Wouldn't miss another dust bath." He caught Arya's eye. "Someone has to drag her out if she decides to swim in lakes again." Plans set, ravens dispatched, the company bedded down. Arya lay on her cloak staring at the tent's canvas ceiling as rain began pattering outside. Flecks of sleet that rattled like thrown seeds. She listened to Jon's steady breathing across the narrow aisle, to Ghost's muted snores, to the distant rustle of banners. Sleep did not come. Instead, images unfurled behind her eyes. Moat Cailin's squat towers sinking into mire, their black stones slick with centuries of moss. Spiral glyphs blooming across ramparts like lichen. Dust swirling above the marsh, condensing into a silhouette crowned in ice. She saw herself climbing spiral stairs within one tower, needle-dripping silver droplets that hissed where they struck the floor. At the summit, she faced a mirror of cracked obsidian. Her reflection reached out a hand, and its palm smoked with frostfire. She jerked awake, though whether she had slept she could not say. The rain had ceased. The sky outside glowed with false dawn. She rose, tugged boots on, and slipped beyond the tent flap. The camp lay hushed beneath a thin mist clinging to grass blades like cobweb dew. Only sentries moved, silhouettes drifting between torches. She walked east to a low knoll overlooking the King's Road. The land beyond rolled dark and silent toward Winterfell, a promise of home on the horizon. She thought of Sansa overseeing lords, Bran weaving spells, maesters grinding dragon glass. She pictured Gendry laughing in the forge's heat, Sansa's brow smoothing when scrolls bore good news. These images steadied her. Footsteps creaked behind her. She turned to find Jon approaching, cloak clasped, hair unbound and damp with dew. He stopped at her side without speaking for a time, simply watching pale light gather in the east. Eventually he said, "Bran thinks we can end it at Moat Cailin." "Yes. The cost grows each time." His voice threaded with fatigue. "People look to me for answers I don't have." She clasped his forearm. "We answer with our feet, 1 mile at a time until the path ends. That's all leadership is, Jon." He huffed a soft laugh. "You sound like father. Or maybe like them." His gaze flicked skyward where ravens circled. "Let's hope the path ends soon." It did not end soon. Marching south through the Barrowlands became a trial of mud and sudden spring torrents. The weather turned strangely mild, snows melting into quagmires that bogged wagons and drowned horses to their bellies. Men muttered that winter was withdrawing too quickly, as though repelled by something foul. Crops sprouted green blades weeks early, only to wither overnight beneath blooms of blue frost. Bran claimed the dust distorted seasons, tugging at the weave of natural cycles. Farmers fled crofts, haunted by frost-burned fields littered with shards of ice shaped like tiny knives. They joined the host, swelling its ranks but burdening supply. On the 9th day out from Winterfell, the spear column split. Arya, Jon, Lioness 200 spears, 40 Karstark pikemen, 10 giants under one weg one eye, plus the dragons, though Rhaegal and Viserion would scout ahead while Drogon ferried messages. Bran descended from his horse to kiss the roots of a lone weirwood perched beside the King's Road before turning back with the main host. Arya watched him ride away, cloak flapping like a great raven's wings, and felt an odd pang of separation. The path grew narrower without the sightless boy's calm. Still, their pace quickened unburdened by the larger train. They cut through pine copses where saplings already budded green, waded icy creeks swollen with runoff, skirted ancient barrows where stones toppled like drunkards. At dusk Rhaegal would alight, wings sending up ripples across reed pools, and Arya would rest against his warm flank while Lyanna drilled her bears to spear throw in marsh grass glowing amber. The hound taught giants to swing felled trees as clubs. Pod practiced dagger forms under Gendry's watch, new obsidian edge humming under starlight. On the eve of the 12th day they glimpsed Moat Cailin. It rose from the marsh like a black reef, 3 towers of mottled stone, squat yet imposing, linked by ragged wall segments half swallowed by peat. Pools of standing water mirrored clouds tinted pale green by aurora. Even the dragons circled warily, wings whispering through damp air but never beating too close. From a vantage on a dry hummock Arya studied the ruin.
No banners. No visible fires.
Yet power tingled, subtle as spider silk, across her skin. Needles crack warmed. They encamped on a low ridge west of the causeway. Jon convened captains in a ring of lanterns while scouts probed the perimeter. Their reports grew stranger. Spiral patterns etched in mud where no hand could reach, reeds frozen into precise arc shapes though air remained above freezing, frogs turned glassy statues mid-leap. One scout returned white-faced, claiming to hear a child's laughter echoing from the central tower though he saw no one. "Dust," Arya said, gathering like iron shavings round a lodestone. Gendry hefted his new hammer, an iron replacement etched with old Valyrian glyphs copied from a scroll. "Then we're the smith's tongs." His grin held only grit. The plan was simple by necessity. At dawn giants would wade across the shallowest section of marsh, carrying bundles of sharpened stakes to form a cordon. Bears and Karstarks would advance along the causeway, shields interlocked, clearing any resistance, while Vicerio and strafed the battlements with fire. Jon would lead a detachment through a breach on the east wall to seize the gate tower, cutting off retreat. Arya and a hand-picked team, Gendry, the Hound, Lyanna, Pod, would slip through collapsed siege tunnels Bran claimed still wound beneath the walls. Their task: reach the heart of the ruin, locate the nexus where dust gathered, and drive obsidian into whatever form it took. Dragons would hold overhead to burn anything that fled. Arya tried to sleep, but the air shimmered as if thick with unseen insects. Every breath carried a faint sweetness that reminded her of the valley's perfumed dust. She finally rose and prowled camp edge until she found Lyanna Mormont perched on a stump, legs dangling. "Can't sleep either?" Arya asked. Lyanna snorted. "Sleep is for maids." But the girl's face looked older, shadows beneath fierce eyes. "We fight ghosts tomorrow. Hard to swing at air." Arya crouched beside her. "Swing at what air becomes." Lyanna tossed a pebble into the bog. "They'll write songs of you, Arya the Dustbreaker. Let them sing you instead. The bear who roared into twilight." The girl's lips curved. "Only if I roar loud enough." Dawn arrived beneath a quilt of low gray clouds. Mist hugged the marsh so thick the tower's upper halves floated like islands. Giants lumbered into water, their tread sending ripples through mirrored reeds. Men followed along the causeway, shields raised. Viserion swept overhead in a hush of wings and exhaled emerald flame that licked stone ramparts, shattering mossy spurs. Stone shrieked. Somewhere iron rang. Arya, the hound, and their cadre slipped into a half-collapsed tunnel mouth concealed by cattails. Inside, the air stank of ancient wet rot. They crept single file, torchlight casting bars across slimy brick. The hound led, hunched nearly double, sword drawn. Arya followed, needle ready, heart steady. They rounded a corner where water pooled knee-high. Across the murk, faint tendrils of mist coiled, glowing with pale blue flecks. The air vibrated like a distant harp string plucked at random. Ahead, steps climbed to a crumbling stone hatch. Light filtered through cracks, though whether torch or other luminescence she could not say. She signaled halt, padded up the steps alone, flattened against the wall, and eased one slab aside just enough to peer through. The chamber beyond yawned circular, open to the sky where half the roof had caved. Moon-pale daylight spilled across floors marbled with black moss. At the center, a spiral mosaic of colored stone depicted a tree crowned by starbursts, roots twining into serpents. Upon that spiral hung dust, coiling in slow vertical currents like smoke in still room. Tiny blue sparks darted within. The sight enthralled and repulsed, as though glimpsing a heart beating outside its body.
No guards, no wicks.
But on the far side stood a single figure. Tall, hooded in ragged black wool, face masked by a shard of cracked ice bound with leather thongs. In its hands it cradled a vessel, a broken helm fashioned of glazed stone, veins of obsidian radiating like spiderwebs. The dust drifted toward the helm, funneling in shimmering strands. Arya's pulse hammered. Here was the vessel, not yet a body, but a seedbed for the Night King's echo. And someone, this hooded zealot, was mid-ritual. She signaled the others forward. The hound squeezed into the gap, scowled. Lyanna slipped behind him, spear poised. Gendry hefted his hammer, Pod clutched his dagger. They burst through. The hooded figure spun, cloak billowing. The mask gleamed with frost. Slits revealed eyes luminous blue. It raised a hand and spoke a string of guttural syllables. At once the dust vortex contracted, swirling faster, forming a tight column bridging helm to sky. Wind blasted outward. Torches flickered. The hound lunged, sword whistling. A wall of ice coalesced mid-air, deflecting his blow with a glassy clang that sent sparks skittering. Gendry charged from the flank, hammer swinging overhand. The figure gestured. Shards of shattered flagstone rose, pelting him in a hail that rang off breastplate. He stumbled but pressed on. Arya darted left, dropping low. Needle flashed, slicing through dust like water. Within the vortex she felt cold lick her tears. Frost feathered her hair. She pivoted, targeting the hand that held the helm. The figure sensed her, turned. Ice spears burst from the floor, impaling air where she'd been. She rolled beneath, came up inside spear tips, blade stabbing. Needle jabbed cloth, felt resistance, but the cloak moved like water around stone, twisting away. Lyanna Mormont shrieked a war cry, vaulted a fallen beam, and drove her spear at the figure's knee. The sharpened obsidian head struck, biting through cloth. A hiss escaped behind the mask, reedy yet dripping contempt. The spear iced over, locking fast. Lyanna released it, drew a dagger, but the figure backhanded her with a gauntlet of frozen mist. She flew across the chamber, struck the wall, crumpled. Arya's vision tunneled. Rage blotted fear. She sprang after, but the hound was quicker. He barreled into the figure, sword in a two-handed grip, smashing aside fresh ice. They slammed together, his strength against unnatural chill. Frost crawled up his blade, but he roared, shoving forward. The figure's arms trembled. The helm slipped, clanged to the floor. Dust faltered, swirling erratic. Gendry seized the moment, hammer arcing. He brought it down upon the helm with a grunt that split his throat. The iron head connected. Obsidian veins flared bright blue, then shattered. The helm exploded into shards, dust blasting outward in a shockwave that hurled everyone flat. The hound skidded across stones. Arya slammed onto her side, breath punched from lungs.
Yasrang.
When she staggered up, dust clogged vision. It drifted like gray snow, aimless. The hooded figure knelt amid shards, mask cracked jagged. Through the break, Arya saw skin pale as moon milk, veins pulsing cobalt beneath. No human visage, something half-formed, features still swirling. It looked up, and in its eyes she read fury tempered by vast patience. Then the eyes dimmed. The body collapsed, cloak folding on itself. Within seconds, only cloth and runny slush remained. Silence fell. Arya's heartbeat thundered loud enough to fill ears. She scanned the chamber. Lyanna groaning but alive, Pod dragging himself to elbows, Gendry panting over his ruined hammer, the hound nursing a frost-charred forearm. The dust drifted toward cracks in stone, dissipating like steam. Is it done?
Pod whispered.
Arya surveyed the spiral mosaic. The colored stones dimmed, blues fading to dull gray. She felt nothing in her hinge.
No pull.
Only exhaustion. For now, she said, voice hoarse. But dust always settles somewhere. They gathered Lyanna, improvised a sling for Gendry's biceps sliced by flying shard, and returned through the tunnel. Outside, battle sounds waned. Arrows twanged, giants bellowed, then hush. Jon met them at the inner gate, face smeared with soot. She saw relief bloom when he counted heads. The ramparts are ours, he reported. No dead fought. Only traps of ice that melted when the towers fell. His eyes questioned. Arya told him in few words. Helm shattered, dust dispersed, hooded figure gone to slush. As she spoke, she saw tension ease from his shoulders. He nodded gravely. We'll salt the moat with fire tonight. Then hold a vigil. They did. Dragons swept low, bathing ruin and marsh in long tongues of fire that hissed where water splashed skyward. The towers sagged, stones glowing cherry before cracking, tumbling to steaming pools. The night sky reddened, reflecting conflagration. Smoke coiled, carrying a sweet sap scent mingled with peat reek. By dawn, only stubs of wall remained. Fog rolled thick, carrying echoes of crackling embers. The host dismantled camp, prepared to march north once more. Birds flitted where none had flown in years, their trills tentative amid char. Felt like a cleansing. Before departure, Arya stood with needle unsheathed, tip planted in blackened soil at the spiral's former center. Now a shallow pit filled with water that steamed faintly. She pressed her palm to the cracked fuller. Nothing stirred. She breathed easier. Yet as she turned to leave, a single raven swooped down, landing on a charred stump. Its eyes were wrong. No milky intelligence of Bran's warging, no normal glossy black. They reflected blue tinged with violet, like twilight on new ice. The bird cocked its head, croaked once, a sound like stone scraping stone. Then it spread wings and vanished into fog. She watched it go, unease gnawing. Dust settles somewhere. The march home took us a night. On routes north, they passed barrows blooming with spring flowers out of season. Fields where frost-killed crops had sprouted anew overnight. Each sign both blessing and omen. The giants returned to the Frostfangs, singing of hearths carved in ice. Lyanna Mormont rode at the column's head despite cracked ribs, fierce grin daring the world to break harder. The hound grumbled but carved crude bear sigils into spear shafts for her warriors. Gendry fashioned hammers for villagers they met, leaving each hamlet with means to ward against lingering dead things, though they found few. Winterfell greeted them with banners flying, gates flung wide. Sansa embraced Arya at the gatehouse, tears bright on cheeks despite courtly composure. Bran watched from his chair, eyes unfocused, and nodded once. Sam recited a blessing, voice breaking. Fires roared in every hearth. Ale flowed. That night feasting filled the hall with laughter that felt reluctant at first, then genuine as bellies warmed. At the head table, Jon spoke. "Many fell buying this dawn," he said. "We will honor them with lives lived bravely. Winter will come again, but we will face it together." Cheers rose, cups clanged. Yet Arya's gaze drifted to the high windows where night pressed black and silent. Somewhere a raven might circle, carrying faint traces of dust beneath its feathers. Somewhere snow might fall unnatural in midsummer. Yet tonight Winterfell's walls held strong, hot springs steaming beneath stone, and she sat beside brother and sister alive. She touched the crack in needle, felt only steel. For now, she told herself, the door stands shut. Later, after the hall emptied and torches guttered, Arya climbed the battlements alone. Wind tousled her hair, carrying scents of wood smoke and thawing earth. She looked north, beyond the woods, beyond the wall's distant glimmer. The sky lay jewel-bright, washed clean. She whispered the names on her list, some forgiven, some dead, some yet to pay. And in the hush she added one more, dust. Then, for the first time in moons, sheathed needle without dread, and descended to sleep beneath a roof where shadows held no teeth. The wolves of Winterfell howled. Dragons answered with rumbling purrs. The north settled, wary but unbowed. And in a land stitched by old magic and new resolve, dawn came again. Fragile, indomitable, promising that whatever storms gathered beyond tomorrow, the living would meet them with blades of obsidian, hearts of wildfire, and the stubborn memory of a girl who danced between worlds and dared tell death, once more, not today.